The oppression of postmodern architecture, which is designed to demoralize and hurt you and destroy your spirit. I believe that.
People are not taking it seriously enough.
Screaming chaos at you in a soul-destroying manner.
You've discussed an uncanny feeling about modern society. Why do you think everything feels off?
Why do modern buildings feel so wrong? Have you ever walked into a modern building and just felt off? Like something deep in your body didn't want to be there? It wasn't always like this. There was a time when architecture stirred the soul. Cathedrals that lifted your eyes to the heavens. Palaces that made you feel like a divine guest. Homes that breathed with proportion, light, and spirit. So what happened? We went from cosmic resonance to concrete slabs, from golden ratios to gridlock, from stone poetry to drywall silence. This isn't just about ugly buildings. It's about buildings designed to disconnect us from each other, from ourselves. And the deeper you go, the more chilling the story becomes. It's not just nostalgia, something tangible has been lost.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing the world he doesn't exist. And it's this idea that there is no evil. There is no such thing as right and wrong. And I think maybe that's the primary problem. Because if you think that, if you go through life thinking that as long as I'm not hurting anybody else, I can smoke weed all day, and I could be kind of a burnout, and I could go and hook up with no consequences and be a degenerate, well, then people are going to feel complete license to do that, whatever the variety of that sin is going to be. So I think that people need to start to listen to their conscience and really be guided by, I think, what we all know is right and wrong.
From cathedrals to cubicles, where did the meaning go? Look at any medieval cathedral. Then look at the average government office or a new church built with steel beams and plastic windows. One evokes reverence. The other, resignation. That's because sacred buildings used to be designed with intention, to elevate, to heal, to harmonize with the divine order. They weren't just spaces, they were instruments. Their spires weren't aesthetic, they were prayers in stone, pointing to the heavens. Their stained glass didn't just decorate, they told stories to stir the soul. Sound echoed with intentional resonance. Light fell through windows timed to the solstice. The cathedral itself was a portal. Now look at homes. Once the home was a microcosm of the cosmos. Even the modest ones were designed with sacred ratios, cardinal alignment, central hearths, and purpose. They were wombs of warmth, creativity, and continuity. Now, most of us live in boxes, plastic insulation, low ceilings, windows facing brick walls. These aren't homes, they're containers. We didn't just lose beauty, we lost the architecture of meaning. Worse, we've been trained to call this progress. But the real difference isn't just materials, it's the math behind them. Geometry used to be sacred, now it's just cost efficiency on an Excel sheet. Your home layout is no more spiritually intentional than a spreadsheet or a barcode. So let's ask, what makes a space Pythagorean? What were the rules that used to guide sacred design, whether for palaces or peasant homes? Let's travel back, not just in time, but in intention. Before glass towers and gray boxes, there was a code.
People are not taking it seriously enough. First of all, astrology is real. If you're a Catholic, if you're a Christian, this is actually part of our tradition. Astrology is all over the Bible. And the reason as Catholics we can't engage in astrology is because there's something real about it. And to engage in it is to attempt to thwart God's plan.
Right.
It's to sort of say that we are masters of fate, and if we can learn the secrets of the universe, we can control our destiny, when God controls our destiny, and that's why we appeal to God. So astrology is real, and going by another word, you can call this witchcraft, paganism, and people know that atheism is false. And so what we're getting is not really a society without God, it's just a society with different gods. And so now there's a new age upon us where there is interest in the supernatural, there is interest in higher powers and maybe invisible forces, but without the guidance of the church, because the church is out of fashion, now people are looking everywhere else.
Do you think numerology is real as well?
I do.
Really?
I do.
It's something I've looked into. It's really fascinating. People's thing with astrology and numerology manifestation is that, oh, it's also general. It's not actually real. But when I look into it, I don't know. I see some very specific similarities that make it feel real. And I'm Christian as well. So I do think that there's something there that if you do it in a way that it's aligned with God, it's probably okay.
The lost code, geometry that built the sacred. The 10 Pythagorean principles of sacred dwelling. These rules applied to both sacred and private buildings. Whether a cathedral or a cottage, a Pythagorean structure was built to tune the soul. Harmony of proportions. Sacred spaces followed simple whole number ratios and the golden ratio, because these reflect harmony found in music, the body, nature, and the stars. Room dimensions, altar heights, stair counts, everything was tuned like chords in music. Orientation to cardinal directions. Aligning buildings with north, south, east, and west was essential. To sync the inhabitant with celestial rhythms and seasonal light. Entrances faced rising sun, bedrooms aligned with moonlight. Sacred spaces pointed north, central sacred space. A central room or courtyard represented the monad, the divine one. It served as the spiritual and energetic heart of the space. Hearths were altars. Courtyards offered light and communion with sky. Use of the tetractys. The triangle of 10 points symbolized the layers of reality. It reflected harmony from unity to complexity. Staircases, layers of roofing, symbolic features often followed this structure. Sound and acoustics. Design amplified healing frequencies and suppressed chaos. Sound was a medicine. Music, chant, and prayer needed clean resonance. Vaulted ceilings, wood paneling, domes, all chosen for their harmonic response. Light and shadow as symbol. Light was symbolic, sunlight timed to move through space meaningfully. Illumination was a metaphor for spiritual awakening. Solstice-aligned windows, oculus domes, moving light paths. Material symbolism. Materials held meaning and energetic signature. Stone, wood, clay, each spoke to the elements and the divine. Wooden beams from sacred groves, local stone for grounding, numerology and spatial layout. Sacred numbers weren't decoration, they were spatial codes to mirror the divine structure of existence. 3 doors, 7 tiles, 10 steps, not arbitrary but intentional. Microcosm, macrocosm reflection. As above, so below. The home mirrored the heavens. To remind inhabitants they were part of the great pattern. Domes as skies, walls as limbs, hearth as heart, no space without meaning. Every threshold, niche, and beam served a spiritual role. Movement through space was movement through consciousness. Doorways as transitions, niches for offerings, geometry for initiation. So again, ask yourself, what does your home do to you? Does it nourish your soul, or is it a battery pack that drains you? Because at one time, even the simplest home knew the language of the stars. And now we're lucky if it speaks at all. Pythagoras, yes, the triangle guy. But he was so much more than just a theorem in a textbook. You know his name, but not his true legacy. Turns out he was building something far more powerful than formulas. Pythagoras wasn't just the triangle guy. Born around 570 BCE on the island of Samos, Pythagoras was one of the most influential figures of the ancient world. While he's remembered for the Pythagorean theorem, his real legacy is far more mysterious and more powerful. He wasn't just a mathematician, he was a mystic, a musician, an astronomer, a healer, and some say even a magician. Pythagoras founded a secretive spiritual school in Croton, southern Italy, where initiates studied the relationship between numbers, nature, the soul, and the cosmos. His school practiced metempsychosis, the belief in the transmigration of the soul. They believed that numbers were not just quantities but qualitative forces that animated reality. To the Pythagoreans, everything in the universe could be understood through harmonic ratios, in music, in planetary motion, in the human body, and yes, in architecture. All is number, Pythagoras declared. And by number, he didn't mean arithmetic, he meant a cosmic code. His influence shaped Western esotericism, early Christianity, alchemy, and even the medieval quadrivium, the four sacred arts: arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. These were considered the divine tools God used to design the universe, and which man could use to realign with the divine. Some esoteric traditions even claim that these teachings originated in Eden itself, that God taught Adam, Cain, and Abel the celestial sciences before any so-called civilization emerged. In other words, Pythagoreanism wasn't just about math, it was about how to live in sacred harmony with creation. But here's the kicker: none of this is taught in modern schools. Why? Because those schools weren't designed to awaken cosmic consciousness. They were funded to produce workers. Many public school systems, as some historians note, were heavily shaped by Enlightenment materialism. And yes, later influenced by Rothschild-funded educational models, which prioritized industrial efficiency over metaphysical inquiry. The earliest school subjects weren't history or economics or even literature. They were the sacred sciences: geometry, music, astronomy, ethics. Pythagoras taught them all. Architecture wasn't just a profession, it was an initiation into sacred knowledge. Builders weren't simply craftsmen, they were custodians of cosmic codes. So when we say buildings were once designed to elevate your soul, we mean it. They were tuned like instruments. And Pythagoras was the composer. What happened to that knowledge? It didn't vanish, it was hijacked. Which brings us to the man who exposed it. He laid the blueprint, but someone else cracked the code. George Hersey, the art historian who saw The Matrix. Before we can understand how architecture became a psychological weapon, we need to meet the man who decoded the original language of buildings. His name was George Leonard Hersey, a scholar of architecture with the rare ability to see through its surface, decode its symbols, and explain what most never noticed. He wasn't a builder of stone, but a builder of insight. Born in 1927, educated at Harvard and later a professor at Yale University, Hersey was a formidable historian of Italian Renaissance architecture and art. A fellow of the Society of Architectural Historians, he wrote extensively about symbolism, sacred geometry, and the evolution of Western visual culture. But one book in particular, Pythagorean Palaces: Architecture and Magic in the Italian Renaissance, uncovers something far deeper than art. It reveals how ancient mathematics, mysticism, and architectural design were once interwoven to elevate the human experience, and how, during the Renaissance, that alchemy began to fracture. The Pythagoreans were essentially magicians. They believed that certain geometrical and numerical relationships could actually modify human behavior and even personality. According to Hersey, the great architects of the Italian Renaissance weren't just building homes or churches. They were manipulating minds and morals, using sacred ratios, planetary alignments, and symbolic materials. He describes how Pythagorean ideals, like the cube, the circle, the harmony of numbers, formed a spiritual blueprint that shaped how a space would feel. These buildings weren't just meant to be seen, they were meant to be felt, viscerally, psychologically, even spiritually. And when architects abandoned these ideals, Hersey says something broke. There was a time when architecture served the soul. That time passed. The soul was no longer the center, but the subject. From this point on, magic didn't disappear from buildings, it was inverted, which brings us to the palace that changed everything. And what he discovered will change how you see your own walls. Problem palaces, psychological machines, and marble. Hersey called them problem palaces, not because they had flaws, but because they were designed to create discomfort, tension, control. A perfect example? The Medici Riccardi Palace, built by Michelozzo for Cosimo de' Medici between 1444 and 1484. At first glance, it looks harmonious, balanced, Pythagorean, but that's part of the spell. The palace was built on a 10x10 grid, a cube, symbolizing cosmic harmony, but its exterior reads more like a fortress than a temple. The heavy rusticated stone on the outside was psychological armor. It told the public, "We are powerful but humble." Inside, polished symmetry, golden ratio spacing, spiritual elegance. A dual message, "You are beneath us, but look what we understand." Michelozzo didn't make mistakes. Even the controversial corner where two arches share a single column wasn't sloppy. It was intentional tension. This flaw isn't a flaw, Hersey suggests. It's a psychological device, a deliberate dissonance inside what should be cosmic order. The courtyard, sized and spaced to feel larger than it is. The material choices, rough below, refined above. The message, you rise as you climb, but you're still in our system. This is architecture as hierarchical symbolism. It doesn't serve the soul, it commands it. And this wasn't just the Medicis. This became a model all over Europe. Buildings that once harmonized with your spirit, now engineered to hold it in place. And in Florence, he found his proof. How the Medici built spells in stone. What happens when the invisible laws of harmony, once used to elevate, are placed in the hands of a banking dynasty? By the mid-15th century, Florence was a pressure cooker of influence. Money, politics, faith, and philosophy collided in a city where beauty was currency, and architecture was persuasion. The Medici Palace, designed by Michelozzo, wasn't just a home. It was a ritual device, a silent sermon, a spell cast in stone. Hersey explains how the palace became an alchemical fusion, sacred ratios plus fortress logic. On the outside, rusticated walls, defensive posture, small windows. Inside, sublime proportions, fluid courtyards, hidden geometries. The Medici Palace served as a paradox, spiritual symmetry wrapped in civic armor. In its original use, the cube represented stability and groundedness, a base for spirit to ascend from. In the Medici Palace, it became a metaphor for control. What once symbolized balance now broadcast power. The message to the people, we own the codes. We decide who ascends. It was geometry as manipulation, architecture as class control. And to this day, its spell still holds. Visitors feel awe but not warmth. They admire but don't belong. That's not an accident. That's architectural mind control. How banking families took over sacred space.
This is very important. I'm going to name some of the families like the Farnese, the Borgia, the Pallavicini, and Aldo Brandini. And the De Medicis, by the way, the Medicis, okay? Because remember, the Persian Empire was the Medes and the Persians, right? It was the Medo-Persian Empire. The Greco-Roman Empire, right? That's where the Medicis come from, and they control the media and medicine. Big pharma. Because we know guys like Cosimo de' Medici, he actually helped translate the Hermetica and Plato and did many great things. He was a benefactor of Tommaso Castanella, I think Giordano Bruno, and many, many, many great Neoplatonists, all right? So it's not good or bad. None of this is good or bad. This is just explaining how things work.
Before the rise of finance, architecture existed to connect us to cosmic order. From ancient temples to medieval cathedrals, buildings were designed to align with the heavens. The very act of walking through them was meant to calibrate your soul to divine harmony. But with the rise of banking dynasties, the Medici, Farnese, Orsini, and later the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, a transformation occurred. They didn't just acquire wealth, they acquired the language of sacred geometry, and they used it not for harmony, but for hierarchy. What had been spiritual guidance became spiritual display, a symbol not of ascent but ownership. Vaulted domes became family crests, private chapels mimicked public cathedrals, and slowly, the meaning of symmetry shifted, from sacred resonance to social dominance. Sacred space was no longer a doorway to the divine, it was a real estate. And in a world where buildings shape belief, that shift rewrote the spiritual architecture of society itself. Now the question isn't just how they did it, but why. How the elite hijacked the Pythagorean code.
Do you believe that postmodern architecture is designed to kill your spirit?
Of course. What's
Why?
the message of it? Anything that we make with our hands, it's the purest expression of our creativity. So there's a purpose behind everything that we make. And so buildings that are warm and human and that elevate the human spirit are pro-human. And brutalism, for example, or the IMP glass boxes that crowd every city in the United States, those are not elevated. What's the message of working in a cube in a room with a synthetic drop ceiling and drywall on the walls and fluorescent lighting ahead of you and no privacy at all? What's the message? The message is really clear. You mean nothing. You are replaceable. You are a widget in a bin awaiting assembly. You're just a cog in a machine. You have no value. Everyone kind of ignores this like, oh, well, that's the way buildings have always been. No, that's not true. And architecture and anything made by human hands is the purest expression of the society that produced it. So we were like, oh, they're handicrafts. No, they're not handicrafts. They're a visible and tangible sign of who you are, not just as a person, but corporately as a society. And if you live in a place that creates nothing beautiful and doesn't provide people uplifting buildings to live and work in, that's a very sick and dark society.
This is the pivot point, the moment sacred math stopped being medicine and became a weapon. Inverted magic is not the absence of intention, it's intention in reverse. To understand architectural harmony, one must first believe that buildings affect us not only physically, but morally. That belief didn't die, it was co-opted. Take a building that once mirrored the harmony of the heavens and twist it just slightly. Keep the ratios, but exaggerate them. Keep the geometry, but blunt the ornament. Keep the space, but remove its resonance. Now the building doesn't heal, it distorts. The geometry of space, Hersey reminds us, has the power to dignify or debase. You don't need chains to control a population. Just place them in spaces that reinforce limitation. No curves, no color, no spiritual scale, just repetition, symmetry without soul, and materials that whisper, you are disposable. The Renaissance turned architecture into rhetoric. A building could now argue, sometimes loudly, about authority, obedience, and control. He explains how the same Pythagorean tools that once harmonized man with cosmos became tools of illusion and authority. When used rightly, a column could elevate the heart. When distorted, it could intimidate. Even a subtle error in proportion can unsettle the viewer without them knowing why. Today, this inverted magic thrives. We see it in skyscrapers that make us feel small, in office grids that reduce the human spirit to a productivity algorithm, in homes with ceilings so low they crush aspiration before it's even formed. A column out of place can unsettle you, a square too perfect can trap you. Inverted magic isn't just real, it's everywhere. Because once magic was turned against the soul, it was no longer sacred, it became strategic. And that's the world we've inherited. And what happens when we live in buildings designed to disorient us? The architecture of meaning, lost and found. They didn't just steal beauty, they rebranded sacred design as luxury, and then placed it far out of reach. The Medici were among the first to translate Pythagorean geometry into instruments of power. They understood the emotional effect of balance and form, but instead of using it to elevate all people, they used it to broadcast dominance. Take the Palazzo Medici Riccardi, designed with harmonic cubes and sacred internal courtyards. On the inside, cosmic order. On the outside, control, hierarchy, fear. The rusticated exterior, Hersey writes, speaks not of welcoming symmetry but of guarded hierarchy. This was a building that told the public, you may approach, but not belong. From there, the formula was perfected. Make buildings with just enough sacred proportion to impress, but strip them of their healing energy. The elite preserved the shell, but hollowed out the spirit. Architecture became a visual metaphor for submission, Percy notes. The proportions were not merely ornamental, they were tools of persuasion. Today, corporate lobbies mimic classical forms, but only to invoke awe, not comfort. Banks mimic temples, government buildings mimic fortresses. The form remains, but the function is inverted. We are made to feel insignificant and told it's beautiful. The hijacking is so complete, most people don't even know what they've lost. And meanwhile, the codes remain, hidden in plain sight. They are still using the sacred math, but not to harmonize your soul, to measure it, to box it, to sell it back to you as status.
Why do you think everything feels off?
Well, I think that everything feels off because we're not living the way that probably most of our ancestors lived. We're maybe the first generation that is completely atheistic. I think that's maybe unique in the history of mankind because even primitive humanity had animism, believed that gods were in the animals and in objects. We've always been believers. We've always built idols or statues or shrines. This is the first generation that has no connection to the divine, the supernatural. There's no sense that there's anything beyond this plane of existence, beyond death even, waiting for us.
Letters, numbers, codes, algorithms. A printed page is an army of dancing demons. A hyperstyle hall is a forest of beings. An architectural plan is a group of gesticulating gods.
Our souls consist of all proportions, like the anima mundi. To impose harmony on stone is to remind man of his place in the cosmos.
Beauty is the harmony and concord of all the parts, so that nothing could be added, taken away, or altered except for the worse.
The orders are costumes. Doric is man, Ionic is woman, Corinthian is maiden. On the stage of a facade, each plays its part.
And just as the human body yields a circular outline, so too a square figure may be found from it.
This reality is made of contiguous or overlapping squares and circles. These, in turn, are generated by the physiques of beings, such as angels, intelligences, and demons. Beings shaped like man, but invisible, of different sizes, and magical or divine.
The invisible population of stone. Hersey writes as a scholar, not a seer, and he refuses to amputate spirit from structure. He doesn't say Renaissance thinkers flirted with mysticism. He says their architecture was inhabited. In his account, geometry isn't ornament, it's occupation. Artists and architects quite literally constructed gods out of ratio and form. In this worldview, a building is never empty. Pythagorean palaces makes it matter of fact. Buildings are never neutral. To build is to summon. The Pythagoreans weren't drawing for aesthetics. They were drawing portals. For the Renaissance architect, the divine wasn't a metaphor, it was a layout. Every proportion functioned as a conjuration, a precise rhythm meant to bridge matter and spirit. A printed page is an army of dancing demons, a hypostyle hall, a forest of beings, an architectural plan, a group of gesticulating gods. If that lands like poetry, remember, for the Renaissance mind, this was procedure. Vitruvius gave the instruments, the square and the circle, the hypostyle grid, the cubic principles. Alberti tightened them into number machines, squares, cubes, and the palindromic balances of duity, so a plan could be analyzed like a score. Serlio turned the facade into a cast, the orders into costumes. Doric as man, Ionic as woman, Corinthian as maiden, and a 100-column hall into an architectural atom. Then Ficino stepped in and said the quiet part out loud. Space itself is inhabited. Surface reality is made of contiguous or overlapping squares and circles. These in turn are generated by the physiques of beings such as angels, intelligences, and demons. Beings shaped like man but invisible, of different sizes, and magical or divine. This isn't metaphor, it's mapping. Ficino, Hersey reminds us, assigns armies to geometry. He equated the cube with the army of individual souls, the point with the gods of the world, the line with the army of angels, and the plane with the army of demons. A building's geometry is not decor, it is a host frame, and the city knew it. There were not only human, artistic, and technological constructed gods, and beautiful idols, hidden or visible. There were also invisible but equally beautiful hosts of spirits, and these spirits inhabited cities of invisible temples, cities reflected or exemplified in part by visible earthly architecture. So art did what art always does when reality is too large to look at directly. It made the invisible visible. Dome frescoes filled with thick choirs of beings, invisible beings made visible through the magia naturalis of art, contained within spherical perspective views of the cosmos. Such beings, mobile and feminine, circled over the stationary, earthly, manly cube of the church's crossing, countering its silence with their song. That is not superstition. That is a specification. When proportion is right, your body knows. Barbaro says it plainly. Even then, it will sneak back into the senses. You don't have to believe for it to work on you. Harmony lands. Distortion lands harder. A single error in measure can unsettle a crowd without a word spoken. This is the argument. To build is to summon. The grid can be a choir loft. It can be a drill square. Geometry can lift the heart. Geometry can press it down. The same tools that tuned man to cosmos can be tuned against him. So, what do we summon? Our towers glare. Our lobbies echo. Our ceilings drop to the brow. We kept the shells and starved the hosts. We did not erase the invisible. We only changed who answers when we call. If the old city could fill a dome with angels, intelligences, and demons, what fills our ducts and corridors now? What gathers in the low ceilings and fluorescent noon? What answers a grid that has forgotten to sing? Listen, really listen, to the next room you enter. If it silences you, ask why. If it lifts you, ask how. Because Hersey is not whispering ghost stories, he is handing you a key. The population of stone never left. The only question left to us is, who did we invite? Break the box. Reclaim your resonance.
And music, to me, is the most representational form of art, because I think that the world is made out of patterns. And we perceive some patterns as objects, but fundamentally it's patterns. And what you want is all the patterns of the world to interact harmoniously in something where every element is related intelligibly to every other element. And I think that when your life is in harmony, then you can feel that. These small places that people can call their own, even if it's only their room, you can start to do something creative and beautiful there. I mean, I've suggested to people that they start by putting their room in order. And that implies a purpose. It's like, well, your room is somewhere that you exist. It's a place that surrounds you, that tells you how to be. Put it in order so at least it isn't screaming chaos at you in a soul-destroying manner. Make it pristine and orderly in a fashion that suits what you're aiming at. So have an aim. Well, maybe you start by putting your room in order and then you make it beautiful. And then you learn how to make something beautiful. And to make something beautiful is to make it worthwhile, and to participate in that transcendence. You start in the world, if you have some wisdom and some humility, by taking the potential that lies dormant in front of you and interacting with it in the logos-like manner, with truth and with love, and by transforming that potential into whatever you can create out of it that's good. And even if it won't be small if you do that. You can transform your whole household by transforming your room. You can transform your whole neighborhood by transforming your house. Like, these things spread very, very rapidly. And that is right there in front of you, you know? And people think they're impoverished now, that they don't have any opportunity. And the opportunity is hidden from them by their unwillingness to take the steps that are necessary to put what they could put in front of them in order, and to produce the beauty instead of the ugliness where they could do that. And I don't think there is anything more powerful than that. That works.
We asked a question. How did we go from cosmic resonance to containers? We followed the code, Pythagoras' numbers, the old ratios, the living grammar of light. We read Hersey, and we saw what he saw. Buildings were never neutral. Palaces were built to awe, to stage power, to invert the magic and call it taste. But the invisible population never left. By that, the old writers didn't mean Hollywood ghosts. They meant the qualities a space can host when number, light, air, and sound align. Houses are instruments. Orientation, windows, and ratios tune them. A well-tuned house feels alive. A badly tuned one feels off. That's not a haunting. It's detuning. And when the pattern breaks, presence doesn't vanish. It degrades. Grids go barren or busy or mean. Not guidance, grit. Not protection, pressure. We traded cathedrals for cubicles, sanctuary for square footage, resonance for revenue, and called it progress. We took the bells, those bronze voices that stitched time and town, and silenced them. We restored the organs until breath no longer met stone the same way. We wrapped rooms in coatings that warn us in labels, and wondered why the spirit of a place grew thin. Yet the knowledge never died. It was buried, hollowed out. But it's still here, in plain sight. In a square that fits a circle, in a curve that softens a corridor, in light that arrives at the hour the body most needs it. When the old writers said angels and daemons, they weren't pitching a horror movie. They were naming harmonies, the felt companions of order and care. Call them patterns, fields, moods, if you like. What matters is this: they answer to proportion. So now what? Tune what you have. You don't need a permit to begin arrange with ratio. 1 to 2 rectangles, 2 to 3, and 3 to 5 groupings. Avoid near-miss symmetry. If the box is harsh, add curves. A round rug, a bowl, a circular mirror. No curve, no flow. Let light heal. Catch the morning. Warm the night. If windows are stingy, multiply with mirrors. Honor air. Ventilate. Filter. Reduce the off-gassing. Living breath beats dead coating. Sound the room. A soft chime. A small bell. A steady, low anchor that tells the nervous system, we're home. Practice ritual attention. Clean a corner. Set a candle at threshold. Move one thing with intent. Qualities notice care. Because it was never about the style. It was always about the alignment. If enough of us retune, the false form cracks. The code was inverted because it worked. So work it back. We were never meant to live in boxes. Not in our homes, not in our minds, not in our souls. The ancients encoded the exit, in stone, in number, in light. Pythagoras wasn't drawing triangles. He was mapping the human instrument. So welcome back, builder. Brick by brick, light by measure, room by room. The code was never theirs to keep.